where the Romans have come in. They have stifled you in your religion because you're a part of this Jewish family. In ancient times, they have changed all the rules, but they've allowed you to think that you can still think for yourself. But they've placed their own rules there. They've constricted what you're allowed to do, where you can go. You are unarmed. The revolts that have happened among some of your people, you've seen them rebel, them rise up, and then quickly get cut down by these Roman soldiers. And now I want you to picture the Roman soldier in your mind. I don't know if you know what a Roman soldier looks like or what they look like. Maybe you've seen pictures of them. Maybe you've watched some of those ancient medieval movie/sci-fi movies that depict them maybe a little bit differently than they actually were. But they were very proud. They were proud because they carried the name of Rome. They served Caesar. Caesar was their god, and they served many other gods too, but they served many gods but were a godless people in a lot of ways. If they weren't involved in torture themselves, they had seen the torture of other people. And so because of their conquest and the battle and their ruthlessness, they've become desensitized. A lot of the historical writings, and when you read about the Roman soldiers and what they went through and how they reacted in their everyday lives, there seems to be some sign of what we would call PTSD. And so because of that, maybe you have this morbid sense of humor. You have a lack of empathy. You have no sympathy at all. And you have these people walking around, which are dangerous enough, but then you give them a sword and a shield. They are very dangerous people. They're a nightmare. But I want you to imagine looking at someone like that, knowing that you can't do anything about it. And so that's where this hope of that Messiah comes into play. When you see these people that they seem like they are untouchable. And maybe when they're in the marketplace or when they're talking with one another, if they're doing patrols or whatever reason they're going through where the Jews live and through their towns, collecting taxes maybe for Caesar, you hear them laughing and joking, and maybe some of the jokes that they're telling are very morbid and twisted, and you kind of wonder, how do you think that's funny? Like, you must have seen something so horrible or gone something so traumatic to find that humorous or entertaining in some kind of way. But they were obnoxious even down to what they looked like. Now, I imagine two Jewish people, maybe they are talking and they're complaining about the taxes that they have to pay to Caesar, and then all of a sudden this bright light flashes in one of their face, and so he kind of squints and then looks up and sees that it's a Roman soldier who has set his shield down, and there's this brass ball on the front of their square-shaped concave shield, and the sun has shined off of that brass ball on the front and then beamed him right in the eyes right as they're talking about the taxes that they have to pay to Caesar. And then all of a sudden, that hatred just kind of ignites. It's almost like they start placing things in their mind, like, I bet that soldier did that on purpose. I bet he meant to do that to me. And how contagious that attitude is and that hatred and that bitterness is. They think we used to be this great nation. People all over used to respect us as a people. And as we went through the wilderness and as we came up upon these cities, when God was with us and we had those leaders, everyone would not come near us because we had the Ark of the Covenant. We had these great leaders like David, the warrior king. We had these leaders like Joshua and Caleb and Moses who are willing to stand up and fight our battles for us. And now we're under the boot of Caesar and these Roman guards, and all of this hatred that has to build up. We have a disconnect from that because we're in America, the land of the free, but we still do have enemies. And so I want to pay attention to the sermon that Jesus gives, especially the heart of the sermon that Jesus gives in Luke chapter 6, and try and make it apply more to us today and what we're going through, because we're not being stifled by these Roman soldiers. We're not in a place like that. But there are some very valuable lessons that we can learn about when Jesus says to love our enemies. But I want to make a point before we get into the heart of his lesson. Jesus is very up close and personal with this particular crowd. It's difficult to tell someone something that they don't want to hear. It's very hard to do that, to look somebody in the eyes and tell them something that they don't want to hear. Many of you know that my uncle's not doing very well at all. And for a long time, they were only allowing one visitor to go inside his hospital room at a time. They wouldn't let anybody else. They'd let one visitor a day. And as he continued to get worse, and thankfully he's doing a little bit better now, but as he continued to get worse, I called my grandparents who needed to go up and consult the doctors, and I said, this is the day I can get up there and see him. Like this, the rest of the weekend is full. this is the day, I need to get up there and see him too, because I didn't know when I was going to be able to do it after that point. And they said, we need to consult the doctors, and so I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to reschedule that. And so I said, well, what if I went up there and just looked the person in the eye that's supposed to tell me that I can't go back there and see my uncle who's in this terrible condition and see if they can say no. And if they can, then, obviously I won't go in the room, but I'll know that at least I tried. And so I would have that in the back of my head. If the worst case scenario happens, I could look back and say, I did drive up there and I tried to see him and it didn't happen. If I don't, then I'll just be thinking, but what if they let me in? What if I didn't go up there and then they would have done it in the first place? So I figured it's really hard to look someone in the eye and tell them, no, you can't go in. He's already had his amount of visitors for the day. And so I went up and I talked to the lady on the phone, and she said that I wasn't going to be allowed to go up there into the room. And then one of the nurses was going back into the area where my uncle was, and I just stopped her and said, look, here's what's going on. My grandparents are going to be talking to the doctors and talking about my uncle's condition and what they need to do, and maybe it's the worst case scenario. I'd just like to go in there and see him because I drove a ways to get here, and I don't know if I'm going to have another shot to do this. And then she said, okay, come back with me. And then she took me back there, and I was able to visit with him. It's hard to look someone in the eyes, but over the phone, it's really, really easy. I want you to look at where Jesus is in Luke chapter 5 as he begins to preach to the people. In chapter 5, verse 1, it says, on one occasion, while the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake. And so he's standing there, there's this large crowd, and they are pressing him further and further back towards the water. And so what Jesus does, there's a boat right there, and so he steps on someone's boat, he pushes off from the shore, and he separates himself a little bit to have some breathing room because the crowd is becoming so large, and he floats out on this boat, and then he begins to preach to the crowd from the boat. All right, now back to Luke chapter 6. Starting in verse 12, it says, in these days he went out to the mountain to pray, and all night he continued in prayer to God. And when day came, he called his disciples and chose from them 12 whom he named apostles, Simon, who he named Peter, and Andrew his brother, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, and Matthew, and Thomas, and James. And then he said, the last verse there says in verse 16, and Judas the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, the one who became the traitor. Now notice verse 17. So you have a difference between Jesus stepping out on the boat and having this separation between him and the crowd. And then here we see that he came down with them and stood on a level place. Jesus was, if you see this large crowd coming towards you, and if you read down and see what that crowd is made up of, starting in verse 17 here, it says, he stood on a level place with a great crowd of his disciples and a great multitude of people from Judea, Jerusalem, and the seacoast of Tyre and Sidon. In verse 18, who came to hear him and to be healed of their diseases, and those who were troubled with unclean spirits were cured. Now, I want you to put yourself in Jesus' place as he's coming down the mountain, and he sees this large crowd that's waiting for him at the bottom, and it's made up of disease-ridden people and people with unclean spirits and demons. It's natural for us as humans, if we see that, to kind of want to put some distance between us. Right now, this probably hits really close to home because of the coronavirus. You see all of this disease and go, I trust God, I have faith in God, but I'm not foolish. So I'm going to have some distance between me and them up on this mountain. I'm already safe up on the mountain, but it says that Jesus came down from the mountain to the point where those people in the crowd were able to reach out and grab a hold of him. So they do, and we see that the power of Jesus goes out, and all of them are healed. So he comes down from that mountain. He's not on a mountain. He's not on a boat. He is standing amongst them on a level place, eye level, with everybody that's in that crowd. Probably at this point, they are on all sides of him. So he's at eye level, and at some point, he is looking down at the ground. Maybe he's trying to gather his thoughts, and we know that he was looking down, and it's probably after the healing had taken place, because in verse 20 it says, and he lifted up his eyes at his disciples. And so he zeroes in on his disciples, those that are chosen that he chose to follow him. And remember, amongst those people are the traitor, Judas, that he knows is going to betray him. So he lifts up his eyes, he focuses on his disciples, and he gives a few of the Beatitudes. Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you shall be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. Verse 22, blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude you, and revile you, and spurn your name as evil on account of the Son of Man. So he says, as we opened up with these Roman soldiers, who they probably felt some hatred to. We already know that they had some hatred towards Matthew, the tax collector. But they have this hatred in their heart. They have these expectations of who Jesus is, the Messiah, the one who is going to be violent in some ways to overthrow the Romans. And he says to love those who hate you. But now I want you to look at verse 27. I don't know at what point he breaks eye contact, but we do know that he lifted up his eyes and he's looking at his disciples. And then he says in 27, but I say to you who hear. So there are those in the crowd that, what we would say is, and this will come back later, but we maybe because we are human, we'd look out at that crowd and say, they're only going to Jesus because they have this disease they want healed. They're only coming to Jesus because they have this demon they need cast out, which that's understandable. I don't know what that was like, but I would want that out of me too. But he says to those who will hear, that word hear means to understand and to accept. So to those that are here, not just for the healing, not just for to get your demons cast out, not just to get fed or to see some miracle, for those that are here, that are in the crowd, that are willing to hear. So he breaks gaze with the disciples and he begins to scan. Remember, he's at eye level here. He's at eye level looking at all of these people in a great position to get stoned if he says something that they don't like. And here's what he says. But I say to you who hear, love your enemies and do good to those who hate you. Again, this is the Messiah. And if people are catching on, hey, this could be the Messiah, that doesn't sound like something that their version of the Messiah would say. But he says, love your enemies and do good to those who hate you. Now that word love there is this word agape. And so just to make that practical, Jesus is telling them to don't love people with your feelings, but love people with your actions. Don't love people that because you have this warm feeling towards them or because you have this soft spot for them, but love people with your actions. And then he goes on to say, here's what this looks like. And so his first commandment that he tells his people, those that will hear, those that will accept and understand. And as he says, those who will hear, he switches from his disciples into that crowd. And I like to think that he is also looking into the future and looking at all of the different churches that are going to need to hear this very same message today, to love your enemies and do good to those who hate you. Are we willing to hear that as well? Are we willing to accept and understand? Are we amongst those people who will hear? So his first point is let people see the love of Christ. If you're one of those people that are going to hear and accept and understand this, then love your enemies and do good to those who hate you. So this is not tolerance, which is maybe what comes to mind when we think about the times when whoever you consider to be your enemy, that might be a strong word, but we kind of get a glimpse of who your enemies are, and that's those people that will not do that for you. Those people that will not do good to you, and those people that will hate you and not look out for your best interests. But this is not merely just tolerance. This is not, well, I put up with them, or you just kind of look at them from across, just smile and wave, but in the back of your mind you're like, I despise that person. And that's kind of how we were, this passive-aggressive way. We're just kind of like, hi. And, and then we, on the way home, in the car, we just start, ripping someone apart. But that's not what Jesus is talking about here. Love your enemies. Don't just tolerate them. Love them. And here's what that looks like. Doing good to those who hate you. Do good to someone who would never do good to you. And then he goes on. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. Now, this one, it hits very close to me just because of who Jesus is also addressing. To those who hear, Judas is there, the one that is going to betray him. The one, he already knows this. Now, what would you do with that kind of knowledge? If you're looking out, would you be shooting dirty looks to Judas, as you are scanning the crowd, and just every once in a while just look at him and start making a point, like, I'm talking to you, I know everything, and I want you to know that I'm on to you, and I know what you're going to do. And to have that kind of bitterness in his heart, but he doesn't. He says, bless those who curse you. Now, this blessing here says something about our tone as well, because you can say the right things and have the completely wrong tone. For instance, you have the two sibling rivalry that happens where you have two siblings, they get in a fight with one another, and they're just going at it. And so finally, one steps out of line, and so the mom goes up to one of the kids and says, "Now, son, say you're sorry." And, had murder in his eyes and his jaws clenched, looks over at the other sibling and goes, "Sorry." Said the right word, but did not mean what he was saying. And so, he was blessing as much as he had to bless that person, but tone goes along with it. And we see even a practical side to this. When you look at Proverbs 15 and verse 4, it says, "A soft word turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." Now that's true, and I know that a lot of us here have experience with that last one. When that perfect roaster or insult comes to mind, when you go like, "Oh, I can tear this person so good. I just thought of the best one ever. He's never going to recover from this one. He's going to be so traumatized because he's going to feel so bad." And we have this, this clever line we just want to rip into someone, and it starts a war. Well, who would have thought? Or the way that we respond to someone if we're harsh and go, "Well, you," and then just fight back. It makes the problem worse. We had this class that I had to take in school called conflict resolution. And it was this guy from SWAT, and he came in and he started talking about, here's what you do in a hostage situation. Here's how you talk to someone through a window. You can have a megaphone. All you want to do is make sure that that person is calm. And the thing that he kept saying over and over and over again is keep your tone soft. Ask them what you can do for them. Now, when you have all that adrenaline, especially if you're a male and you're there and you've got weapons and guns and everyone's just ready to burst into the door, how hard would it be to keep your voice soft and try and ask them, what can I do for you? It'd be more like, we're about to bust in there and save the day. And then people get hurt. But a soft word turns away wrath. It defuses the situation. So bless those who curse you. Don't just say the right words, but it also implies tone. And then pray for those who abuse you. Now, Jesus switches gears here because if you've noticed, everything up until this point is very visible and very public. So if you do good to someone who hates you, that's public. If you bless someone who is cursing you, and I keep picturing that Jewish person, that Roman soldier. The Roman soldier, they were allowed to take people if they were on a march and then force them to carry their equipment for a mile. And someone that is able to do that, just take their bag off and just dump it on someone and force them to walk a mile, is probably not the nicest person in the entire world. But bless those who curse you. Again, that's public. And then pray for those who abuse you. What Jesus seems to be indicating here is don't put on a show that you like people. Don't put on a show that you love people. Love people even in private. So that means when you go back to your home, you're no longer in the street. You're no longer in this conversation with your enemy or whoever that might be. But when you go back home and you're in your room and it's just you, don't scream, don't punch a hole in the wall, don't just rip in or vent to someone saying how much you hate that person and how hard it is for you to keep a level head when you're around them. He says, pray for those who abuse you. Integrity. Love your enemies in public, love your enemies in private. And there is something very healing about talking to God about the people that don't like you or that abuse you or that you feel like you've been abused by. Praying to God about that and giving that to God does so much more than you ever could. Because God already knows about all of that. God also knows how you've carried yourself in that situation. But again, I have to keep pointing back to the fact that Judas is there. Pray for those that abuse you. Now, abuse is a very light word that's used here. What about betray? And give you over to be crucified, one of the worst deaths ever in the hands of those Roman soldiers that we started off talking about. Pray for those who abuse you. Could Jesus do that? Jesus can pray for his enemies and those that abuse him. Now I want to talk about these next couple verses because these have been ripped out of context, but also sometimes we just don't like the implications of what these verses are saying. Verse 29 says, to the one who strikes you on the cheek. Now, that's also a very light way of saying punch, but that's what that is saying there. And it's not cheek, it's jaw. That's what that word is translated to. To someone who punches you square on the jaw, you are to defend yourself and punch him right back in the face, even harder, to make sure he doesn't get back up. All right, next verse. No, just kidding. It says, turn the other cheek. Now, have you ever been punched in the face before if you're boxing, maybe accidentally? Or, a deer jumps out in front of the road and your wife just throws an arm out and just like smacks you right in the face. I mean, it will provoke some rage. It's like, this is the button that God gave us. Your nose, this is the button that God gave you. If you want to be instantly mad, have someone punch you right in the face. It can be your best friend. It doesn't matter. They punch you in the face, all of a sudden you want to murder them. Not really, but you want to fight back at least. Then Jesus says, turn the other cheek. Give them a clear shot to your other jaw. Now this is not some passive aggressive like, oh yeah, that didn't hurt. Hit me right here. That's not what is going on here. Let's just keep the next verse in the same context or the same scenario. How about that? So turn the other cheek, and then if they take your cloak, don't withhold your tunic either. So what I'm picturing here is they see that whatever cloak you're wearing, they're like, that's a nice cloak. And they go up and they punch you in the face. And once you're on the ground, they take your cloak off of you and say, like, this is my cloak now. I'm bigger and better than you. I just proved that I am the alpha male. I'm on top. I punched you. I win. Now I get your cloak. What Jesus is saying then is offer your undershirt as well. Now, where this is ripped out of context is when people will say, like, no, look, it is totally wrong at any time to defend yourself. That is not the point that Jesus is trying to make here. What Jesus is trying to make through all of this is show the world someone different. Show the world something different. Don't respond the way that everybody is expected to respond, especially at this point. If someone punches you, don't show them this rageful, wicked, and evil side. Don't do it. If someone hates you, and you know that they hate you, do good for them. Not to get back at them. Oscar Wilde said, forgive your enemies because nothing annoys them as much. That's not the point behind that. It's to do good for that person, even though they hate you. Show the world something different. Let the world hear something different. If someone curses you, now picture someone yelling at you and cutting you down, bless them. Now, that might be lost in translation there. We're not like, I cast a blessing on you. That is not what's being talked about here, but respond differently is what Jesus is trying to say here. All right. And then verse 31 is the most famous verse from this passage, the very heart of the lesson here. As you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. As you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. Do something to others that you wish that they would do to you, even though you know that they won't. Because it's about something bigger than this. Now, if you go back and look, I want you to point out who is in the audience here. It happens to be the perfect people to hear a message just like this. And again, remember, Jesus is walking around and he is speaking eye level. He's not putting himself above them. He's not making a separation. He is at eye level, surrounded by everyone, and he is looking them in the eye, knowing full well that they are under the oppression and under the boot of Caesar, and he's saying to love your enemies right in the eye. Those Roman soldiers, yes, I know I'm about to be killed by these Roman soldiers, about to be crucified, and I can still say, love your enemies. But look at the crowd. The crowd is made up of all these people who are diseased with unclean spirits. And they just were healed. Their lives were completely changed right in that day, right in that moment. That's the perfect audience to hear what Jesus has to say. I mean, why would Jesus... These people are societal rejects. These are people that we know that those that had demons or unclean spirits, they were cast off by themselves, put in isolation. Those that were lepers were put in camps made up of all lepers, kept off by themselves. And you have a crowd of people that are now all mingled together. You have disciples there, and then you have people from Judea, Jerusalem, and the surrounding area. So you have healthy people there as well, those to hear what Jesus has to say. And they're all mingling with one another. Those with diseases and unclean spirits brushing up against them, touching them, being right there, right up close and personal. And you have this entire audience that's there anyway because they know that Jesus is the answer. It doesn't matter if we're brushing up against each other or if you're right next to me and you have this demon, which I don't know what that looked like, but they knew that the person who is speaking here has the ability to heal all of us here. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We don't have to be worried about catching this disease or being beat up by someone that has this demon inside of them because Jesus is right there. They're the perfect people to hear this because they know that Jesus just offered them something just because he was willing and just because he was a servant and because he loved them. So Jesus demonstrates it. And he heals them all, changes their life entirely, and then says, love your enemies. The person that maybe they found out you had leprosy and you tried to hide it, they come to your door and they say, I know you have leprosy, and they drag you and they take you away from your family and they throw you into a leper camp. That'd be pretty easy to hold a grudge, to be bitter towards that person and say that, before you even knew I had leprosy, we weren't even sure yet, and you threw me out. Things like that. All of those personal grudges that crowd could have had, they listen to Jesus. Jesus heals them and then says, now you'll love your enemies. And I want to know how that sat with Judas as he's sitting there knowing, or if this even came up in his mind as he got to that point where he is now going to betray Jesus. If he ever once thought back to that lesson about how Jesus would respond, because he already knew. He knew if he did this to Jesus, Jesus was not going to respond and kill him because of who Jesus was. When you think about the church today, we are a church made up of people that have all kinds of diseases, and I'll say demons, not literal, obviously, but we have baggage and things that we carry into church, into worship. But the reason we're all here together is because we know that Jesus has the power to heal. Jesus has the power and can give us what we need, because Jesus has all that power and he's willing and he loves you. But he's also asking for something in return, to act differently. Show the world through your actions that you're different, that you can love like Christ, and let the world hear the voice of Jesus through the way that you respond to people. And then, even when it comes to that private place, love people, even in private. If this is something that you struggle with, I know to some degree, all of us have struggled with this at some point in our life. But if you have if this is something that you've struggled with so much that you need the prayers of this congregation here, we are here for that reason. We can pray for you because we do love you. And if this is a lesson that has helped you to see the beauty of the church, and I hope it has, to see that Jesus cares about everybody and can heal anything and can take anything out of your life that maybe is holding you back from him, and you've been thinking about getting baptized for a while, then this is the perfect Sunday to do it. If there's any need that you have, then why not answer the Lord's invitation now as we stand and as we sing.